Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take the chaos of sources, articles, and research and distill it into the kind of knowledge that makes you, our listener, the most interesting person in the room. We don't just scratch the surface. We drill down until we hit bedrock.
Today, we are undertaking a really deep dive into one of America's most historically significant yet often misunderstood states, Alabama. Its story is far richer and, way more complex than the headlines of the 20th century might suggest.
Absolutely. The source material we've gathered is huge. It spans ancient history, bitter colonial conflicts, defining sociopolitical struggles, and a truly radical economic transformation. This deep dive is our mission to cut through all that noise, all that information overload, and challenge those easy stereotypes right out of the gate.
Right. And our goal for you, the learner, is to synthesize this diverse historical, geographic, and economic data to reveal the state's multiple layered identities. We're aiming to connect the dots between, say, the massive prehistoric mound complexes and the modern aerospace factories, to really understand how Alabama functions as a political and economic entity today.
So let's start with a foundational snapshot, just the basics. Alabama was the 22nd state admitted to the Union on December 14, 1819. The capital is Montgomery.
But what's fascinating is that while Montgomery holds the political power, the largest city today, both by population and by area, is actually Huntsville. That detail alone immediately hints at a shift away from the old political and agricultural centers toward the modern technological hubs.
That's a great point. And when we look at age, the state's story really begins on the coast. The oldest city is Mobile. It was founded by French colonists way back in 1702, and it initially served as the capital of this vast French colonial territory known as La Louisiane.
A key historical point that gets missed all the time. And as for the nicknames, we all know them. The Yellowhammer State, the Heart of Dixie, and the Cotton State.
And we promise we will explain exactly why a yellow-trimmed uniform gave the state its most unusual moniker a little later on. Okay, so let's unpack the name itself. Alabama. Like so many places in the Southeast, its roots are indigenous. Our sources confirm it comes from the Alabama people, who were a Muskogee-speaking tribe. They originally lived near the confluence of the Coosa and Tallapoosa rivers.
And that's a critical linguistic classification. For you, the listener, the Muskogean language family is huge. It forms the foundation of nearly all the indigenous languages in the American Southeast. We're talking Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw. The Alabama people are just one branch of this deep linguistic tree.
And as the Spanish conquistadors first explored in the 16th century, they had trouble spelling it, didn't they?
They certainly did. The early European records, like the ones from Hernando de Soto's 1540 expedition, show this huge variance. You see things like Alabamo, Alibamu, and then this almost unrecognizable version, Limamu.
Wow.
Then the French later tried to standardize it to Alibamo when they were naming the river, the Rivière des Alibamo, in the early 18th century.
I'm particularly interested in the scholarly debate around the actual meaning. It isn't as simple as beautiful land or some other, obvious translation.
No, it's highly debated, but the prevailing academic theory is quite specific, and it's rooted in Choctaw, another Muskogean language. Scholars suggest it derives from two root words, alba, meaning plants, weeds, or vegetation, and the word ummo, which means to cut, to trim, or to gather.
So if you put this together, what do you get?
It translates most likely to clearers of the thicket, or maybe herbed gatherers. This strongly implies an identity that's tied to land management and early agriculture, a society that actively worked the land, clearing it for cultivation or gathering necessary medicinal plants. It's a very practical, very functional name.
Which brings us to the romantic myth we absolutely need to debunk for you, the learner, because it's the one everyone thinks they know.
Yes. The famous but completely unsupported 1842 translation, "Here we rest."
Right.
It was popularized later by a historian, Alexander Beaufort Meek, who claimed he learned it from a Native American woman. And while it's lovely, and you see it printed on postcards, linguists who specialize in Muskogean languages have definitively concluded there is zero evidence to support that translation. It's folklore, not etymology. We rest on the scholarly interpretation. Clearers of the thicket.
Speaking of deep roots, before any Europeans showed up, this region was a massive center of civilization. It wasn't just an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered.
Not at all. Indigenous habitation spans thousands of years, with complex societies forming sophisticated trade networks. The biggest example, and the one we really need to focus on, is the Mississippian culture, which dominated the state between, say, 1000 and 1600 CE.
And the hub of that culture in Alabama was the massive complex at Moundville.
Moundville Archaeological Site in Hale County is. It's the second largest complex of the classic Middle Mississippian era in North America. It's second only to Cahokia in Illinois. It wasn't just a random collection of mounds. It was a major political and religious center.
So what can the sources tell us about its scale and its function? What was it like?
At its peak, between about 1200 and 1450 CE, it was a massive community. The site features 29 mounds arranged around a central plaza on a bluff that overlooks the Black Warrior River. The mounds were mostly platform mounds, and on top of them were the residences of the elite, the political leaders, the priests.
So that indicates a hierarchical society.
A deeply hierarchical society, yeah, with specialized religious and political functions. They were controlling resources and trade across a really wide area.
The discovery of artifacts at Moundville also helped scholars establish what we call the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex, or SECC.
That's a crucial insight. The SECC is the major artistic and religious framework that defines the religion and the cosmology of Mississippian peoples across the Southeast. What's truly fascinating is that analysis of these unique symbols, they're related to warfare, power, nature, confirm that this complex developed entirely independently. Contrary to some earlier kind of Eurocentric speculation, there are no direct links to Mesoamerican civilizations like the Maya or Aztec. It was a uniquely American regional development of ritual and religion.
So by the time the Spanish arrived, they weren't just encountering isolated bands, they were dealing with the inheritors of powerful, established civilizations.
Precisely. When European contact intensified, the historical tribes present included the Iroquoian-speaking Cherokee up to the north, and then these powerful Muskogean-speaking groups across the central and southern parts of the state. So you have the Alabama, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, Creek, and Coasati. And these groups, even though they were linguistically related, had developed distinct cultures, political systems, and territories, which of course sets the stage for the next section, the colonial power struggles.
Moving into the colonial period, Alabama became the ultimate geopolitical hot potato, a prime piece of land that every European power wanted a slice of. It was a centuries-long game of European ping pong.
It was incredibly unstable. The Spanish arrived first, of course, with Hernando de Soto exploring Mobile in 1540, but they focused their energies elsewhere and didn't establish permanent settlements right away.
It was the French who really seized the opportunity. They established Old Mobile in 1702.
And that location was incredibly strategic. Mobile was founded by the Lemoyne brothers, and it was the capital of La Louisiane, French Louisiana, all the way until 1763. This meant that the French claim extended from the Gulf Coast all the way up the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys. Mobile was the vital gateway for trade and influence in the American interior.
But the tide turned dramatically after the 7 Years' War.
Indeed. The French lost, and the land was ceded to the British in 1763. It became part of what was called British West Florida until the end of the American Revolutionary War in 1783.
Okay, here's where the history gets messy for you, the listener, if you think the U.S. immediately inherited everything. Post-revolution, the territory was split, leaving this odd political wrinkle.
That's the crucial wrinkle. The U.S. claimed most of the territory, but Spain, which had re-entered the conflict, retained control of Mobile and the surrounding coastal counties as part of Spanish West Florida.
How long did Spain hold on to that prime piece of coastline?
They held it until 1813, when the U.S. formally annexed it during the War of 1812. Even then, the official claim wasn't completely settled until the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, which officially confirmed the cession of the territory to the U.S., which just happened to be the same year Alabama achieved statehood. That coastal history means Alabama's identity is steeped in Spanish, French, and English culture, far more than its northern neighbors.
This messy history fueled political pressure. The immediate drive was to carve out new states for settlement and, crucially, to establish more slave states to maintain that political balance in Congress.
That necessity drove Congress to form the Alabama Territory in March 1817 from the eastern half of the Mississippi Territory. Once that political decision was made, the floodgates just opened.
And then we get this incredible volatility of the capital shuffle. 5 capitals in 30 years. That's not just musical chairs, that's political chaos. Why so much rapid movement?
It really reflects the state's rapid decentralized growth and that constant political jockeying we talked about. So you start at St. Stephen's, that was the territorial capital. Then Huntsville hosted the Constitutional Convention because it was a growing, relatively sophisticated northern town. But the choice of Cahaba from 1820 to 1825 as the first permanent capital, that was deliberate political compromise. It placed it closer to the central Black Belt region.
But Cahaba didn't last long, right?
No, it was a terrible spot. It suffered from frequent flooding, disease, its remote location. It was abandoned relatively quickly for Tuscaloosa, which is the capital from 1826 to 1846. Tuscaloosa offered a more centralized, stable location and better infrastructure.
So the final move to Montgomery in 1847, what drove that?
That was driven by its central location in the burgeoning cotton economy and its accessibility via steamboat and eventually rail. It was the logical endpoint.
Now let's discuss the Alabama fever land rush. This is where the state's economy was truly cast in stone. What was the mechanism behind this population explosion?
The mechanism was simple. The land was perfect for cotton cultivation. Land speculators and settlers, largely from Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, just poured in. They were drawn by the promise of cheap, fertile land that had recently been acquired through treaties or, frankly, outright seizure from Native American tribes.
The population numbers are just staggering. Under 10,000 in 1810, but over 300,000 by 1830. That's exponential growth fueled entirely by one crop.
And that growth concentrated the wealth and the population in the central Black Belt. This name is geographically descriptive. It refers to the dark, highly productive soil, which is naturally rich with limestone and chalk. This soil created a perfect environment for growing short staple cotton, enabling large plantations and thus the massive importation of enslaved African Americans to work them.
And the sources are really clear. The development of the Black Belt economy, built on this fertile soil, made the forced removal of indigenous peoples inevitable. This all culminated in the Indian Removal Act of 1830.
Sadly, yes. As cotton expansion proved wildly profitable, the political will to remove the remaining tribes, the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, became unstoppable. By 1838, the vast majority had been forcibly removed to Oklahoma, marking this violent transition to a purely agrarian, slave-based economy.
The foundation laid by cotton and slave labor meant Alabama was immediately central to the ensuing national conflict. By 1860, the demographics were undeniable. 435,000, 80 of 964,201 residents were enslaved, nearly half the population.
The state was politically and economically just tied to the institution of slavery, leading to quick action. Alabama declared secession in January 1861, becoming one of the first states to join the Confederate States of America.
And as we noted earlier, Montgomery earned a unique place in history by serving as the Confederacy's initial capital before the government relocated to Richmond, Virginia.
That brief role cemented its historical importance. And this leads us to the state bird and that nickname, the yellowhammer.
Give us the origin story. It's always satisfying when a nickname has a specific, sourceable moment.
It's a great piece of military lore. It started with a company of cavalry soldiers from Huntsville. They wore new uniforms that were trimmed distinctly in bright yellow cloth. When they joined Nathan Bedford Forrest's battalion in northern Alabama, they were greeted by another unit shouting, "Yellowhammer, Yellowhammer!" The name just stuck, first to that specific unit, and then to all Alabama troops in the Confederate Army, and eventually became the state nickname.
After the war, Reconstruction was a period of brief but really radical change. Slavery was abolished, and Alabama was under military rule until 1868.
And the 1868 Constitution, drafted during this period, was transformative. It created the state's first public school system, a huge step, and it expanded property rights for women. And most critically, with former Confederates temporarily barred from office, African Americans quickly became political leaders. They elected 3 black congressmen during Reconstruction: Jeremiah Harrelson, Benjamin S. Turner, and James T. Rapier. That representation was unprecedented and, well, fleeting.
Because that progress came crashing to a halt in 1874.
Yes. The 1874 election saw conservative Democrats, the so-called Redeemers, regain power through significant intimidation, fraud, and violence. This ushered in the Jim Crow era, which was focused on legally stripping away the political rights and economic autonomy of African Americans.
The timeline of legal segregation is a depressing demonstration of how quickly and systematically those rights were removed.
It happened over decades, bit by bit, to ensure every aspect of public life was segregated. Segregated schools were codified in 1875, railroad cars in 1891, jails by 1911, and our sources even confirmed that segregated bus stop waiting rooms were legislated as late as 1945.
But the ultimate weapon in this fight was the 1901 state constitution. We will discuss its structural problems later, but its immediate impact on voting rights was devastating.
It was a surgical tool designed to establish white political supremacy. The Constitution implemented voter registration provisions, most infamously the poll tax, which was cumulative, meaning you had to pay for previous years you hadn't voted, and the subjective literacy test.
And the result was immediate.
In just 3 years, African American voter registration dropped from over 181,000 eligible voters to fewer than 3,000. It essentially wiped out the black vote entirely.
But here's the surprising vital nugget of insight from the sources that complicates the narrative. This disenfranchisement wasn't solely racial, it was also economic, and it hurt the poor of both races.
Absolutely. The planting elite, who drove the 1901 Constitution, they leveraged racial fears to push the measures through. But the cumulative poll tax and the harsh administration of literacy tests were inherently burdensome for all poor, marginalized, and uneducated people.
So what does the data show decades later?
By 1941, the sources indicate that the economic barriers had disenfranchised a shocking number of poor European Americans, around 600,000, compared to 520,000 African Americans. So while the intent was overwhelmingly racial, the impact was a broad reduction of the suffrage, ensuring political power remained concentrated among the wealthy elite.
While political power was being restricted, economic forces were fundamentally changing the landscape. The agricultural depression caused by the destructive boll weevil infestation, combined with unrelenting discrimination, triggered the Great Migration.
The boll weevil absolutely devastated the cotton economy in the early 20th century. This agricultural collapse, alongside Jim Crow laws, pushed hundreds of thousands of African Americans to emigrate north. It dramatically slowed the state's population growth.
Yet simultaneously, we saw rapid industrial growth in cities like Birmingham.
Yes, internal migration fed the rise of Birmingham, the so-called Magic City, which grew rapidly into a powerhouse built on heavy industry coal, iron, and steel mining. The state's economic center of gravity began to shift, albeit slowly and painfully.
We also need to acknowledge the chronic, systematic underfunding of African American education during this era. It's just a complete indictment of the political structure.
It is. The sources highlight the crucial role of external philanthropy, specifically the Rosenwald Fund. Because the state legislature refused to provide adequate funding, the fund financed 387 schools, along with teacher houses and vocational buildings.
But there was a catch to the Rosenwald funding, wasn't there?
A very telling catch.
Yeah.
To secure the funds, African-American communities and local black residents were required to raise matching funds. This meant they were effectively taxing themselves twice, paying taxes to the state that ignored them, and then taxing themselves again just to build the basic schools their children needed. It demonstrates incredible community dedication despite systemic oppression.
Moving into the civil rights era, despite the changes in population and industrialization, the political structure remained frozen. The sources highlight the legislature's incredible refusal to reapportion seats based on population.
From 1901 to 1961, the legislature did not reapportion. Not once. This meant that the rural agricultural areas, where the old political power lay, were grossly overrepresented, while urban and industrial areas like Jefferson County, which is Birmingham, were severely underrepresented. And that's despite paying nearly one-third of the state's tax revenue.
So a small, politically powerful minority of the state's population was controlling the levers of government, deciding how tax money was spent and services delivered.
Exactly. A 1960 study confirmed that roughly 25% of the total state population effectively controlled the Alabama legislature. This structural resistance meant that even with the national spotlight on events like the Montgomery bus boycott and the Selma marches, the state government remained defiant.
This finally leads us to the landmark federal cases that changed everything. Baker v. Carr, and then Reynolds v. Sims.
These Supreme Court decisions established the principle of one man, one vote for state legislatures. Reynolds v. Sims in 1964 specifically mandated that state districts for both houses must be based on population equality. This was revolutionary in Alabama. It forced the dismantling of decades of rural political dominance, though the state resisted and actual reapportionment didn't fully take effect until 1972.
And even after these rulings, resistance continued through more subtle means, like the racially motivated gerrymandering of Tuskegee's city limits.
Oh, that was blatant. The legislature drew the city boundaries into a bizarre 28-sided figure, specifically designed to exclude nearly all African-American voters from the city limits without excluding a single white voter. The maneuver was quickly struck down unanimously by the Supreme Court, but it demonstrates the lengths to which the legislative body went to retain power.
So we have this long history of diluting or outright stripping votes. How did the state finally move towards more equitable representation in local elections? The sources point to the Dillard v. Crenshaw County case in the 1980s.
The Dillard case was an omnibus challenge against at-large voting systems across 180 local jurisdictions. At-large systems, where everyone votes for all seats, typically dilute minority voting strength. And the settlement mandated the adoption of non-traditional voting systems to promote more proportional representation.
Okay, we need to slow down and explain two of those systems because they are crucial to understanding modern Alabama governance. Let's start with cumulative voting.
Okay, cumulative voting was adopted in 5 jurisdictions, including Chilton County. Here's how it works. If there are, say, 4 seats open on a city council, you, the voter, get 4 votes. Instead of having to spread those votes across 4 different candidates, you are allowed to cast all 4 of your votes for a single candidate.
But what's the practical effect of that?
It allows a cohesive minority group, if they concentrate their votes, to elect at least one representative, even if they make up less than 50% of the population. It guarantees proportional representation, which is a powerful mechanism for overcoming historical vote dilution.
And the other method, limited voting.
Limited voting was adopted in 23 jurisdictions, and it was tested successfully in Kenosha County. If a board has 5 seats, the system might limit voters to casting, say, 3 votes. If a majority group controls 60% of the electorate, but is limited to 3 votes, the remaining 40%, the minority, have a much better chance of winning the remaining 2 seats. Both methods were implemented explicitly to create a more equitable system and have resulted in a measurable increase in African Americans and women being elected to local offices.
That is a quiet but powerful legal legacy rooted directly in the civil rights struggle, changing the fundamental mechanics of local democracy. Now, let's pivot entirely. These political battles were fought on a complex and often hostile terrain. Moving from the deep political history to the physical geography, Alabama is often mentally categorized as a flat, coastal southern state. But the geography is surprisingly varied, and its resources are immense.
It is. It's the 30th largest state by area, but its water resources are just staggering. Alabama possesses the second largest inland waterway system in the entire United States, rivaled only by Alaska.
Wow, that's a massive and strategically important asset for trade and commerce, connecting major industrial centers to the coast.
Absolutely. Geographically, about 3/5 of the state is dominated by the gentle slope of the Gulf Coastal Plain, extending down to the coast. But as you move north, the terrain changes dramatically. The northern region, known as the Tennessee Valley, is dominated by the Appalachian foothills. It hosts the state's highest point, Mount Cheha, which reaches 2,413 feet.
And the state is just blanketed in forests.
67% of the state's total land area, that's 22 million acres, is forest. That's a huge land cover. But the statistics on biodiversity are the true aha moment for you, the learner. Alabama is consistently ranked among the top states nationally for overall biodiversity.
Yeah, we need to highlight those specific numbers to really emphasize this point.
Yeah, this is a biological hotspot, particularly for aquatic life. The state hosts nearly 4,000 plant species. But look at the freshwater species. Approximately 307 native freshwater fish species, 97 crayfish species, and an astounding 383 mollusk species.
That's an incredible concentration of mollusks.
It is. The sources note that 113 of those mollusk species are found only in Alabama. This endemic richness highlights a unique and irreplaceable ecosystem. The state's complex river systems, draining the Appalachians and flowing to the Gulf, have fostered unique evolution, making it one of the most important centers of aquatic diversity in the world.
Now let's talk about a true geological anomaly, what you called Alabama's greatest natural disaster.
The Wetumpka Crater, located near Montgomery. This is an 8-kilometer or 5-mile wide meteorite impact crater. This happened 80 million years ago when a meteorite roughly 1,000 feet wide slammed into what was then a shallow sea.
And how can we see the remnants today?
Today, the highly eroded crater forms this visible, roughly circular ring of hills east of the town of Wetumpka. Geologists discovered the characteristic concentric rings of shattered, shocked rock, which led to its official recognition in 2002. It's an amazing piece of cosmic history hidden in the middle of the state.
Are there other key geological marvels we should be aware of?
Well, yeah. In Winston County, you have the Natural Bridge Rock, recognized as the longest natural bridge east of the Rocky Mountains. Then there are the massive cave systems like Cathedral Caverns, known for one of the world's largest cave entrances and one of the largest stalagmites globally. And if you go down to the coast near Fairhope, Eau Rouge marks the highest coastal bluff between Maine and Mexico. The diversity of the state's landscape is vast.
Transitioning to climate, the state is classified as humid subtropical, so hot, long summers and mild, wet winters. But the conversation about climate in Alabama has to focus on extreme weather risks.
This is Dixie Alley, an area geographically distinct from the traditional Tornado Alley in the plains. Alabama, along with Oklahoma and Iowa, has the most confirmed F5 and EF5 tornadoes since 1950. The topography, with its mix of Gulf moisture and Appalachian terrain, contributes to exceptionally dangerous and often long-track storms.
What makes their tornado season uniquely challenging compared to, say, the plains?
Alabama has a rare and dangerous secondary tornado season that runs through November and December. That's on top of the severe peak season in spring, from March to May. This means the threat window is significantly prolonged, and the severity cannot be overstated. The 2011 super outbreak produced 62 confirmed tornadoes in the state, killing 238 people, an illustration of the power of these events.
So we're talking about a state that deals with high heat, high rainfall, major coastal vulnerability to hurricanes, like Category 3 Ivan, which caused immense damage, and a near year-round threat of severe tornadoes. It is a beautiful but physically demanding environment to inhabit.
If Section 3 detailed the political pivot, this section details the economic one. After World War II, Alabama executed a fundamental shift away from its reliance on traditional industries like lumber, steel, and textiles. The collapse of King Cotton and the eventual decline of King Steel in Birmingham necessitated this change.
How dramatic was that collapse?
Oh, very dramatic. For instance, the number of steel jobs plummeted from a peak of 46,000 in 1950 down to around 14,000 by 2011. The state had to proactively seek entirely new economic engines to survive.
And the engine that really started this transformation was aerospace and technology centered in Huntsville.
The profound impact of NASA's George C. Marshall Space Flight Center, established in 1960, is the key driver here. This wasn't just a research site. This was the birthplace of the Saturn V rocket that took us to the moon. The infusion of government contracts, scientists, and engineers fundamentally transformed the culture and economy of northern Alabama.
And this shift wasn't limited to NASA. It attracted a whole ecosystem of tech and military contractors.
Precisely. The Redstone Arsenal, headquarters of the U.S. Army Materiel Command, remains the largest single employer in the state, with over 25,000 employees. This created a high-tech anchor, attracting satellite companies like AD-Tran and Intergraph, solidifying Huntsville's identity as Rocket City.
Meanwhile, the state's largest government employer is not NASA or the military, but a major institution in the field of healthcare and education.
That's the University of Alabama at Birmingham, UAB, which includes the massive UAB hospital. With nearly 19,000 employees, UAB is crucial, illustrating that modern economic growth is driven by knowledge, R&D, and services, not just heavy manufacturing.
However, the state's most visible economic transformation since the 1990s has been its successful recruitment of international automotive manufacturing. This shifted the entire industrial base from steel to cars.
This is a truly staggering achievement, and it deserves a deep look into the how. Alabama is now home to 4 major auto assembly plants. Mercedes-Benz U.S. International, which was the first one, established in 1993, then Honda, Hyundai, and Toyota.
Okay, that's the what. What was the how? What motivated these global manufacturers to choose Alabama over, say, Ohio or Michigan?
3 major factors drove this recruitment: massive state incentive packages, logistics, and the labor environment. Alabama offered aggressive tax abatements, infrastructure improvements, and direct cash incentives that often total hundreds of millions of dollars for each plant. This was the famous incentive war that southern states won.
And logistics.
The state emphasized its superb infrastructure: access to the massive inland waterway system, robust interstate highway access, and, critically, the proximity of the deep water port of Mobile for both receiving parts and exporting finished vehicles made the location ideal for global supply chains.
And the labor environment is often cited as a major draw for international manufacturers seeking a U.S. base.
Correct. The auto plants established in Alabama operate in a right-to-work state and have traditionally maintained non-union labor environments. This provides manufacturers with greater control over wages and staffing, often cited as a key factor in their site selection decisions throughout the South. This industry has created over 67,800 new jobs since 1993, making Alabama the 4th largest vehicle exporter in the nation.
So this is a global economic player, not just an assembly line for the domestic market. What other heavy industries remain strong?
Steel is still core. You have major players like Nucor and U.S. Steel. But the most important concentration is along the Gulf Coast. The massive steel processing facilities, originally built by ThyssenKrupp in Mobile County, now owned by Outokumpu and ArcelorMittal Nippon Steel, represent enormous, high-value industrial infrastructure tied directly to the port of Mobile.
And Mobile is also home to a key aerospace manufacturing coup, diversifying the aerospace sector away from a singular reliance on Huntsville.
That would be the Airbus A320 assembly plant, operational since 2015 at the Brooklyn Aeroplex. This was a landmark event. the first final assembly factory built by Airbus in the United States. It solidified Mobile as a major hub for large-scale commercial aerospace manufacturing, leveraging its port access and skilled industrial labor base.
And finally, a less high-tech but nationally critical sector, aquaculture.
Alabama is a farming leader in the specialized catfish industry. In 2020, the state produced one-third of all farm-raised catfish in the U.S., resulting in over $300 million in sales. It's a specialized, high-yield agricultural product that keeps the state tied to its water resources.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture, all this incredible investment in aerospace, healthcare, and global auto manufacturing, yet Alabama consistently ranks low nationally on metrics like median household income and health outcomes. Why the persistent economic disparity?
That is the essential challenge. The benefits of this new high-tech economy have not been distributed evenly. Huntsville and Birmingham are booming, but many rural areas, especially those outside the major metropolitan corridors, struggle with infrastructure, health access, and generational poverty. This disparity was starkly noted by a UN Special Rapporteur in 2017 who observed poverty in parts of rural Alabama that he stated was worse than anywhere he had seen in the developed world. The transformation is real, but the wealth divide is profound.
This transition brings us to the structure of governance itself, and this is where Alabama truly becomes an outlier. We have to discuss the 1901 state constitution.
Yes, the legendary document. Before its major rewrite and consolidation in 2022, the 1901 Constitution was, by some accounts, the longest extant constitution in the world. It contained nearly 87,000 words and was burdened by over 850 amendments. To put that in perspective, that's about 40 times the length of the United States Constitution.
That sounds completely unwieldy. Critics argue that its length and complexity weren't accidental, they were intentional. Why?
Oh, absolutely intentional. The original 1901 document was designed to centralize power and entrench the social and political control of the wealthy rural elite, primarily by making it virtually impossible for local governments to function independently. This centralization gives rise to what we call the home rule problem, which is arguably the most unique political reality in Alabama.
Explain the mechanism of the home rule problem for the listener. How does the 1901 Constitution set this up?
The Constitution reserves virtually all legislative power to the state legislature in Montgomery. It does not grant counties or municipalities general, inherent authority, or home rule to manage their own affairs, especially when it comes to taxation and borrowing.
So if a local county wants to change a simple policy, like setting up a new waste disposal system or passing a local zoning ordinance, they can't just do it.
They cannot. They must first lobby the state legislature to pass a specific amendment or a specific legislative act just for that one county or city. The sources note that almost one-third of the 850-plus amendments to the old Constitution were purely local in nature. Every legislative session is clogged with local issues, approving a specific bridge, setting a county dog catcher's salary, or authorizing a bond issue for a municipal project.
That seems incredibly inefficient and disproportionately empowers rural legislators who might not care about urban services.
It is precisely designed that way. Rural legislators maintain control over urban infrastructure funding and local ordinances, which ensures that political leverage remains centralized in Montgomery, frustrating urban centers like Birmingham and Mobile. Only 7 counties have managed to secure limited home rule authority, reflecting how entrenched the power structure is.
Moving to the judicial system, Alabama is known for having a very high rate of capital punishment.
Alabama has the highest per capita death penalty rate in the country. A major component of the political reality here is that judges are selected through partisan elections. This system, established in the 1980s, has driven judicial campaigns to become increasingly politicized, expensive, and often defined by tough-on-crime rhetoric.
And the state was a major outlier regarding judicial sentencing in death penalty cases.
It was, until very recently. Alabama was the only state that allowed a judge to override a jury's unanimous recommendation of a life sentence and impose the death penalty instead. The practice was highly controversial. In 10 cases, judges imposed death sentences after juries recommended life without parole. This authority was finally removed by state law in April 2017.
Let's talk taxes. Alabama is widely regarded as one of the least tax-burdened states, but the structure creates huge inequities.
Overall, the state is the second least tax-burdened in the country, largely because property taxes are remarkably low, the second lowest in the U.S. after Hawaii. The property tax structure is frozen by the 1901 Constitution and requires a vote or referendum to be raised, making significant increases nearly impossible.
But the state has to make up that revenue somewhere. What is the substitute?
A heavy reliance on sales and excise taxes. The state sales tax rate is 4%. But with local add-ons, the rate can soar to 10% or even 11% in high-tax areas like Mobile County.
And this is the critical point, the necessity tax.
Indeed. Alabama is one of only 3 states, along with Mississippi and South Dakota, that tax groceries at the full state sales tax rate. Since sales taxes are regressive, this places a disproportionately heavy burden on low-income residents, despite the state's overall reputation for low taxation. They aren't paying property taxes, but they are taxing necessities like food.
Finally, a quick cultural and economic note on alcohol control.
Alabama is an alcoholic beverage control state, meaning the state government maintains a monopoly on the sales and distribution of alcoholic beverages through the ABC Board. Adding to that complexity, 25 of the 67 counties remain designated as dry counties that ban alcohol sales entirely, reflecting the persistent strength of social conservatism in many regions. When we turn to culture, the literary tradition of Alabama is fundamentally shaped by its past. Alabama literature is characterized strongly by themes of race, gender, justice, and the legacy of both the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement.
It's impossible to discuss this without immediately thinking of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and Winston Groom's Forrest Gump, both deeply embedded in the state's identity.
They reflect that deep historical introspection stories that deal with profound injustice and moral complexity. Culturally, Alabama is also the heart of the Bible Belt. An estimated 80% of adults identify as Christian, predominantly Southern Baptist, Methodist, and non-denominational evangelical Protestant.
And this translates into high social engagement, right?
Very high. Regular church attendance in Alabama is estimated at 58%, one of the highest rates in the nation. However, the coastal and urban areas have always demonstrated a diverse faith history.
Give us some examples of that diversity.
Well, Mobile, being the oldest city, hosts the oldest Jewish congregation in the state, Congregation Sha'arei Shomayim, formally recognized way back in 1844. Furthermore, the cities have seen a growth in the Muslim population, particularly among African-American converts. And in the southern coastal regions near Bayou La Batre, there are notable concentrations of Buddhist temples that grew from the influx of Vietnamese and other Southeast Asian refugees following the Vietnam War in the 1970s.
Culturally, though, if you ask any resident, nothing defines the state quite like college football. It is an economic, social, and cultural phenomenon.
It absolutely eclipses professional sports. The rivalry between the University of Alabama Crimson Tide and the Auburn Tigers, the Iron Bowl, is legendary. The sheer scale is mind-boggling. Alabama averages over 100,000 fans per game at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and Auburn averages over 80,000 at Jordan-Hare. These attendance figures rank among the top universities globally and demonstrate how deeply invested the state is in this sport.
And for motor racing fans, there's another enormous venue.
The Talladega Superspeedway. With a seating capacity of 143,000, it is one of the largest racing facilities in the world and a massive economic driver for the region, alongside the Barber Motorsports Park, which hosts IndyCar and sports car races.
Let's get a quick snapshot of the education system. This is an area that ties back to the challenges of poverty and funding distribution we discussed earlier.
The data highlights persistent struggles in educational attainment, despite the presence of excellent research universities. According to 2022 NEAP data, Alabama ranks 39th in reading and 40th in math among fourth-grade students. The high school graduation rate has historically been low, ranked the 4th lowest in the U.S. in early 2000s data.
Which institutions are leading higher education?
The largest campus is the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, with a student body exceeding 37,000. Historically, the oldest institutions are the University of North Alabama and Spring Hill College, both founded in 1830. And the state is a major hub for medical training, boasting 4 medical schools and 5 law schools, indicating significant investment in professional and graduate education.
Finally, let's wrap up with transportation, which is vital for connecting the auto, steel, and aerospace manufacturing hubs to the global market.
The Port of Mobile is the critical infrastructure piece. It is Alabama's only saltwater port and is a major seaport on the Gulf of Mexico. What makes it strategically unique is its access to the Tennessee-Tombigbee waterway.
That waterway link is key, isn't it?
It's transformative. The Tennessee-Tombigbee waterway connects the Port of Mobile directly to the inland river system of the Midwest, providing a cost-effective trade route. In essence, it links the Gulf of Mexico to the Tennessee River and the vast interior of the country, making Mobile a vital logistics center for exporting Alabama-made goods, cars, steel, and components, as well as materials moving in and out of the industrial hubs of Birmingham and Tuscaloosa.
The infrastructure also includes 6 major interstate routes, including I-65 running north-south and I-10 along the coast, ensuring that the high-volume trades supported by the port can move efficiently to the interior. This deep dive has revealed a state defined not by a single narrative, but by deep, persistent layers of history and contradiction. We synthesized huge amounts of information, but let's crystallize the key takeaways for you, the learner.
First, remember the transformation from ancient complexity, the power of the Mississippian culture at Moundville, and the centuries of colonial rivalry that left Mobile in Spanish hands long after the revolution to its current status. It was never a simple march toward statehood.
Second, recognize the fundamental, sometimes painful economic shift. Alabama went from the Cotton State, where the 1901 Constitution became a tool to broadly disenfranchise both poor whites and African Americans, to a modern industrial powerhouse built on aerospace, military tech, and massive international automotive investment, making it a key global exporter.
And third, the structural oddities of governance remain crucial. The highly centralized state legislature, driven by the unique lack of home rule for local governments, is balanced by a tax structure that privileges low property taxes while placing a heavy burden on low-income residents through high sales tax on necessities like groceries.
So what does this all mean for how we understand governance today? We spent time detailing Alabama's long struggle against vote dilution, a struggle that led to court-ordered remedies in the 1980s that introduced non-majoritarian voting systems.
And this raises an important question for further exploration. We noted that jurisdictions in Alabama adopted proportional systems like cumulative voting and limited voting to address deep historical exclusion and create more representative local governments. These methods are designed to ensure minority voices are heard, even if they aren't the majority. So we encourage you to explore how the real-world documented results of these proportional systems in Alabama compare to the performance of traditional winner-take-all systems used across the rest of the U.S. How effective are these unique court-mandated reforms in promoting broader democratic fairness decades later?
A fascinating thread to pull on. That's all the time we have for this deep dive into the layers of complexity that define the state of Alabama. We'll talk to you next time.